The political and economic orthodoxies in the ascendant throughout the world today are incapable of providing the opportunities and the inclusion that humanity desires. China, India, Russia, and Brazil, the so-called BRIC countries, have the dimension, the practical and spiritual resources to imagine themselves as different worlds. Thus, they are potential sources of resistance to those orthodoxies. Nevertheless, the potential for divergence and innovation remains largely untapped. What we find, in fact, prevailing in these countries is some combination of macroeconomic orthodoxy in the conduct of fiscal and monetary policy, state capitalism, and compensatory redistribution, social assistance programs, or subsidies to diminish the severity of inequalities and exclusions. What we do not find is a structural alternative capable of giving equipment, economic and educational equipment, to the majority of ordinary men and women. Each of these countries has found different ways of evading the imperative of structural change. In China, it is now widely agreed that the emphasis of national growth should shift from an export-oriented growth strategy to the deepening of the internal market. This deepening, however, is not a simple task of reallocation of resources. It requires vast redistribution among classes, sectors, and regions. And such a redistribution cannot be accomplished within the limits of an authoritarian political system or without the inspiration of ideas about the alternatives that are not yet present in the society. In India, over 90% of the adult population remains caught in the shadows of the informal economy, in small agricultural or urban enterprises with no access to credit, to technology, or to advanced knowledge and practice. And thus the immense potential dynamism of that society remains unequipped and suppressed. In Russia, the country continues largely dependent for its growth on an oil and gas sector that is incapable of generating jobs for a significant part of the population. The idea that Russia can progress by simply superimposing on this primary production a high technology sector is a fantasy. What would be required and what has not yet been accomplished is a structural transformation, an uplift of every sector of the economy, one after the other, through an alliance between the state and the production system that would be capable of transferring technology and science to every area of production. In Brazil, in recent decades and under recent governments, there has been significant progress in the democratization of opportunities to consume, and thus as well alleviation of poverty and diminishment of inequality. The wage has increased. The conditional cash transfer programs have improved the situation of the working population, and consumer credit has been democratized. But the country has not implemented the much more important and difficult task of democratizing opportunity on the side of supply. That is to say, democratizing access to productive opportunities and resources and to education. In Brazil, under recent governments, poverty has been alleviated and inequality diminished. A market in mass consumption goods has been established. The wage has increased. Consumer credit has broadened. And social assistance programs have helped take millions of people out of poverty. But all of this progress has happened on the demand side, not on the supply side. The task that we have failed to implement is the democratization of access to productive resources and opportunities, as well as to educational capability. The combination of macroeconomic orthodoxy, state capitalism, and social assistance is incapable of solving these problems in our countries. We need something entirely different. We need a structural alternative. We need to democratize our market economies and thus reinvent industrial and agricultural policy. The better to open up access to advanced practice, knowledge, technology, and credit in favor of a multitude of small and medium-sized firms. We need to bring about a radical transformation in the character of education, to establish a form of education that is analytic and problematic, that is cooperative and dialectical, instead of what we largely have, an information-oriented, memory-obsessed, encyclopedic and dogmatic form of education. And to do that, we need to reconcile the local management of the schools with national standards of investment and quality. We need to create the legal and institutional basis for the self-organization of civil society outside the state, because only an organized and independent civil society can imagine and enact alternative national futures. And we need to inaugurate high-energy democracies that preserve a strong capacity for central decision, while at the same time expanding the space of contestation in politics and in society. Now, all of this potential for resistance is for the moment circumscribed by the combination of several mechanisms of evasion. One of these mechanisms is the use of foreign trade or of the structural imbalances in the world economy to replace the task of internal transformation. For example, Brazil exports relatively untransformed iron ore and soy to China, and China in turn sends us back a vast array of manufactured products. We both use the foreign trade as an alternative, not as an incitement to the transformation of our countries. A second mechanism of evasion is the reliance on natural wealth, on agriculture, ranching, and mining in Brazil, on oil and gas in Russia. A third obstacle to the execution of this task of structural change is the mental colonialism that we have generally accepted in our countries. When we cease to believe in in Marxism or in state socialism or in import substituting industrialization. We accepted as alternatives the ideas that now prevail in the high academic culture of the North Atlantic world. These ideas are incapable of informing the institutional innovations that we require. Intellectual rebellion is therefore today a condition for national resistance